All right. Welcome to I'll Read It Eventually, which is a show about my ongoing fascination with all things books and my ongoing love affair with all things books. Uh, this channel is about, whoa, this channel is about um, old books, used books. It's about how books interact with our lives. It's about history and philosophy and theology and religion and mythology and good literature. And probably a bunch of other stuff too. But I think essentially my reasoning for wanting to do this twofold. Number one, I have always, for a very long time at least, loved the content creation idea, And the thing that kept me from just hopping on board with that was this sense that, like, what am I going to contribute? Like, what can I say that somebody else isn't already saying? How many podcasts and YouTube series and TikToks and God only knows what else must there be about books? And then I kind of said to myself, yeah, but who cares? Because you know what all those things are lacking? Just to toot my own horn a little bit, they're lacking me. They're lacking my particular set of interests. They're lacking my particular education. They're lacking my particular situatedness as a middle school teacher. And so I think, ultimately, I just said, screw it. I'm going to do it because I want to, which is probably the most modern thing that I will ever say on this show. Because I think I'm kind of an old soul, and I don't say a lot of modern things. But at least in this case, I want to, so I'm going to. As I said, this is a show about books, and a large proportion of what I plan on doing is telling you, hey, this is a book I just got. This is a book I just got. Books I'm excited about. Books I will read eventually. But also about the books that eventually has actually arrived for. The ones I've read, the ones I'm reading. And who knows, maybe eventually I'll even talk to people, other people, about books. And one of the things that I really want to do, and this is really the second reason why I'm doing this at all, is I want to connect books to what I do, which is a weird thing to say, I think. Honestly, it sounds a little, what's the word? It sounds a little silly. Connect books to what I do. But what I mean by that is books have always been a connective tissue in my life. I have memories when I was a little kid of my grandfather reading Put Me in the Zoo to me, which is kind of like a Dr. Seuss adjacent book, when I was at my grandparents' house to spend the night. I remember my grandmother, my mom's mom, reading books to me when I was a little kid. She would watch me when I was a little kid sometimes. And so there's this deep, almost lineage of love of books. My grandmother in particular was not a highly educated woman for a lot of her life. She didn't get her GED until she was in her late 40s, early 50s. But she loved education. She loved reading. She thought it was super important, and she'd be thrilled to know who I am and what I do now. She passed a number of years ago, but she would just be thrilled to see where I am and what I am, and to know that I have an unbelievable amount of books in my house. And then I remember, my father reading to my brothers and I in the hallway upstairs in our childhood home. And he would record some of those readings and they would put them on cassette tapes, which ages me a little bit. And I remember listening to cassette tapes of my dad reading children's books as I was going to bed, which is just incredible. And when I was a kid, books were an escape. Had a lot of feelings as a young man, and books were an escape. They were a way to put me somewhere else, somewhen else, into a different way of thinking. They open up new worlds. All those things that you hear about books. I'm not saying anything new. Books are time travel. Books are portable magic. Books are all of those things. And those are cliches, but they're also, in large part, I think, true. And it was only really the end of high school, beginning of college, that I realized, and probably the first book that made me realize it, was Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. I read this Modern Library Classics abridged version of that book. And I don't think it's going too far to say that that book is, besides the Bible, probably the book that's most responsible for who I am now. It ignited this love in me for the ancient world that was kind of latent at the time. That book is enormous, and it's hard to read. It's written in the 1700s. 1776, I think, is actually when it came out. It's very hard to read. It's written in the King's English. It's a brick. It's a doorstop, and it's tough. But I read it. I read the whole thing. It's over 1,000 pages, minuscule print. Just tiny. And that's the abridged version I have today. I have this awesome hardbound set of 3, which is the unabridged Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I remember getting to the end of that book, and I put a $20 bill in the back of it. Because I said, you know what? If anybody else ever borrows this from the school library and reads all the way through it, or even most of the way through it, they deserve $20. That was silly. Probably just gave the librarian $20, but she was nice, so whatever. My point, though, is that book was old. But it opened up for me this horizon that said, some of these things are not just new worlds or new ways of thinking, but there is actually a groove, a path that you can kind of set yourself into. Some of the things people say about the Western canon. And I think some of that Western canon stuff goes a little far in saying, oh, here's this unified tradition that we can hold on to. But there is a set of conversations in the Western canon and the Western tradition. And that book catapulted me into that. And books have, since that time, been this avenue for me to try and understand how I fit into the broader narrative of humanity, who I am, by saying, where did I come from? What conversation am I in? What conversation am I a part of? Who am I like? And who's like me? And I think the final reason why I want to do this is just because it will come as no surprise, but I like books. And if there's even one other person who enjoys books and would just get a real kick out of seeing somebody talk about books, then man, it's all been worth it. So, it's a little corny, a little cheesy, but if you watch more than one of these videos, then you'll know that it's pretty standard for my personality. I invite you to come back and hear me talk about books. And as I said, who knows, maybe if I talk about books enough, then I'll have somebody else come along and talk about books with me. I don't really know. We'll see. But I'm looking forward to it.